Hello, hello. Welcome to English Extras. My name is Jean. If you're here, it's because you don't want to sound like a textbook. You're in the right place. This podcast is to help intermediate and advanced learners find alternatives to textbook English so you can express yourself authentically. Before we begin, if you want the transcript for this episode, you can follow the link in the description. Reading and listening at the same time is a great way to improve your English. Ready? Let's begin. It's a dreaded request, feared by all. In an online meeting, in an interview. So, tell me about yourself. A shiver runs down your spine. You start to sweat. Your mouth gets dry. What do you say? Introducing yourself freaks people out, and it's understandable why. It's a very intimidating process. Different contexts might require different ways to introduce yourself, but for this episode, the context will be introducing yourself to your English teacher or tutor. Let's start with sharing your name. There are two common ways to do this. The first way is to say, "My name is." This way is perfectly fine. But I personally think it's more common to say it to a group instead of to one person. So, if you were introducing yourself to a group or crowd, I'd recommend "My name is." But if you're introducing yourself to one person, like your English teacher, I'd recommend the second way. I'm. This way is far more common when you're talking to one person. Notice that I used the contraction. I did not say "I am," but instead I said "I'm." In this context, using the expanded form of "I am" with your name sounds very strange. Usually, when you introduce yourself, you give your full first name. But what if you prefer to go by a nickname? A nickname is usually a shorter version of your full name. For example, if your name is Elizabeth, your nickname could be Lizzie or Liz. The name Elizabeth has a lot of potential nicknames. Another example is my husband. His full name is Christopher, but he goes by Chris. So, here's how you tell someone this. "Hi, my name is Elizabeth, but I go by Liz." I go by. I go by. Or, "Hi, my name is Elizabeth, but I prefer Liz." I prefer. I prefer. Or, last one, "Hi, my name is Elizabeth, but you can call me Liz." You can call me. You can call me. So you have three options to introduce your nickname if you have one. I go by. I go by. I prefer. I prefer. You can call me. You can call me. Of course, you might have two totally different names depending on the languages you speak. For example, many of my Chinese students choose English names. So what do we do in that case? When you introduce yourself, you can say, my Chinese name is, but my English name is. So if I were using this structure to talk to someone in Chinese, I would say, my English name is Jean, but my Chinese name is Jin Zhao Hui. After you give your name, it's very common to tell the person that it's nice to meet them. In French, you say enchanté. In Chinese, you say 很高兴认识你. In English, we say nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Or it's very nice to meet you. It's very nice to meet you. Let's talk about pronunciation for a moment. When one word ends with a T sound, t, and the following word begins with a Y sound, y, such as meet you, something odd happens. Very often, when speakers are talking quickly, the T and Y sounds will combine into a ch sound. So, meet you can sometimes sound like meet you. Meet you. This would most likely happen in informal situations, but it's acceptable in any context. Most native speakers won't notice the difference. Once you start listening for the ch sound, where a t and y sound usually are, you'll probably start hearing it everywhere. What comes after this is usually what makes people panic. What do you say about yourself? Remember, for the purpose of this episode, we're going to use the context of speaking to your English teacher or tutor. Here are some questions you might want to answer while you are introducing yourself. Number 1, where are you from? Number 2, what do you do? Number 3, how long have you been learning English? Number 4, why are you learning English? And number 5, what other languages do you speak? Let's take a look at number 1. Where are you from? When a native speaker says this quickly, you might hear, where are you from? Whereer. The R gets combined with the where, so it becomes whereer. Where are you from? Whereer. To answer this, you can use the structure I'm from. Now, some native speakers will give a little extra information here, depending on personal preference. For some speakers, there is a difference between where you live now and where you were born. So some speakers, like me, would probably say something like this: I live in Florida, but I'm from Kentucky. If you want to include both your country and city or state, you can use the structure I'm from country, specifically city or state. Like this. I'm from America, specifically Florida. Now, let's take a look at number 2. What do you do? In other words, what is your job? It's very common to not only say what your job is, but also how long you've been doing that job. For example, I've been an online English teacher for 5 years. So the structure is I've been a job title for how long? Or I've been a job title since when? Switching for and since is a common mistake I hear from my students. Remember, for how long, since when. Let's look at number 3. How long have you been learning English? I want to mention the specific grammar of this sentence for a moment. Here, we see the present perfect continuous verb tense, which is a little less common, but we use it to talk about actions that started in the past but are still happening or just finished. So, again, the question is, how long have you been learning English? Remember for and since. You can use either structure to answer this question. You can say, I've been learning English for 3 years, or I've been learning English since 2020. I've been learning English for 3 years, or I've been learning English since 2020. Both structures are okay. The fourth question, why are you learning English, is, of course, not something I can answer for you. Are you learning English because you have to? For work, for example? Are you learning English because you have to for school, for example? Or are you learning for fun? The fifth question is usually one I like to ask a new student. What other languages do you speak? I usually ask this because America is very monolingual, meaning most people only speak one language, but I know the rest of the world often speaks multiple languages. To answer this question, you can give your native language plus any other languages you speak and how well you speak them. For example, my native language is English, but I also speak a bit of French and Chinese, and I'm learning Spanish. Again, my native language is English, but I also speak a bit of French and Chinese, and I'm learning Spanish. If you only speak English and your native language, you can say just your native language, just English, just Chinese. Now, let's go back to names for a moment. What if you want to spell your name? There are some contexts where you will be expected to do this, like ordering at a cafe or a restaurant. But you may also want to do this if someone is not understanding your name. This is when knowing the letters of the alphabet is very useful. For example, my dog's name is Pip. This is an unusual name, so people often don't hear it correctly. They think they heard pit, for example. So I often introduce my dog like this. His name is Pip, P-I-P, Pip. And this makes it very clear to the other person. My name, Jean, is not a very common name in America. It used to be common, however, so it's very normal for me to introduce myself and the other person says, "Oh, Jean, that's my grandmother's name." But nowadays, it isn't very common. So I often need to spell my name for people. If I'm ordering something at a cafe, it might sound something like this. "Hi, can I have a name for the order?" "Yes, it's Jean, Jean." That will often do the trick. I don't usually need to spell my last name for people because I have a very common last name. My husband, however, has the opposite problem. He has an extremely common first name and a less common last name. Finally, let's talk about age. If you are in a situation where you need to tell someone how old you are, I want to mention a few things. First, it's very typical to tell someone how old you are by simply giving a number. It doesn't need to be a full sentence like this. "How old are you?" 30. If you want to give a full sentence, that would be, "I'm 30 years old." I'm 30 years old. So if you're giving an exact number, you have two options, 30 or 30 years old. Now, let's talk about some common mistakes I hear. I hear, "I'm 30 years and I have 30 years. Both of these are incorrect. We can say, "I'm 30 or I'm 30 years old, but not "I'm 30 years. In Romance languages like French and Spanish, the correct way is to use the verb to have with your age. But in English, we use the to be verb with your age. Now, if you don't want to give an exact age, for whatever reason, it doesn't matter, then there are some ways to suggest how old you are without giving an exact number. For example, you can give a range like this. I'm in my late 20s. I'm in my late 20s. Whatever decade your age is in, you can add an S to make it plural. So 20 becomes 20s, 30 becomes 30s, 40 becomes 40s, and so on. If you are between 20 and 24, then you are in your early 20s. If you are between 24 and 26, you are in your mid-20s. And if you are between 27 and 29, you are in your late 20s. And this distribution, early, mid, late, applies to all the decades. If you are exactly on a decade number, such as 20, 30, 40, or 50, then we usually don't use this in structure. For example, I am exactly 30, so I probably wouldn't say I'm in my 30s. However, it's possible some people will say this. Whew, that was a lot of information. Don't worry if you didn't understand everything right away. Feel free to listen to this episode several times. You'll probably understand something new each time you listen to it. And if you need some help, you can get the transcript for this episode in the description. Thanks for listening. Until next time, bye.